Welcome back to another episode of the Kings Pulse podcast presented by the Kings Herald. My name is Brendan Nunez, and I'm recording this by myself right after the Kings just beat the Clippers at the Golden One Center, the second time that the Kings have played this Clippers team. Back-to-back games here for the Kings. The Clippers did just play the night before against the Lakers and won a close one there in LA. But before I dive too much into what was a pretty promising victory, where I think the Kings showed a lot of signs of growth, and that's kind of going to be the theme of this episode. I want to start with what we heard Alvin Gentry and some of the other guys, Richaun Holmes, Tyrese Haliburton, mention at practice the day before this Clippers game. Recording this on the night of the 4th, like I said, when the Kings just beat the Clippers, but practice took place on the 3rd. It was the first home practice that the Sacramento team has had under Alvin Gentry. My understanding is that they also had one practice on the road, but this now gave Gentry a little bit of a opportunity to potentially implement some new things and kind of spend some time going over whatever he felt was needed with the roster that he's taken over from Luke Walton. It's now been 7 games if you include both of these Clippers games, and Gentry is 4-3 during that stretch. And some of the big differences we've heard, I guess to start, Gentry has pointed out that he's really not going to change all that much. You know, he was on the coaching staff from the beginning of the year. A lot of what was implemented at the start of the year, Gentry had a say in, even if he was not the final decision maker. So I don't think that we should expect massive changes or anything like that. But, you know, the differences that I have noticed, Walton mentioned pace, and he mentioned pace a good amount, but Gentry mentions pace every single sentence that he possibly can. And, you know, when Walton was let go, we heard Monty McNair speak to press and say that he thinks this team can be the fastest team in the league. We still haven't seen that. The pace has actually gone down since Gentry's taken over, but I don't think that's exactly representative of the speed they've been playing at. There's some really poor games in that stretch, and it being only 5 games, 6, but 5 for the stats that are available if you kind of accumulate all of them there. If we're talking about pace, there's some really poor ones. You know, there's that Memphis game, there's the Philly game, which is the first one Gentry took over. I just think that looking at those numbers right now is a really small sample size and not very representative of what I think has been an increased pace since Alvin Gentry has taken over. There's, you know, less opportunities to run in transition because, you know, they keep saying the greatest asset we have is our speed, right? And we're going to use that in transition. So you get less transition opportunities if you don't get stops. You know, the easiest way to get transition opportunities is to get stops and then on the defensive end and then run off of those missed opportunities from your opponents. So not securing defensive rebounds, where the Kings are still 29th in opposing offensive rebounds allowed, is going to limit your transition opportunities. Not forcing steals is also going to limit your transition opportunities, which is something the Kings have not been very good at. They're only averaging 7.2 steals per game prior to this Clippers game that just concluded here, which is only 23rd in the league. And opponents average 13.6 turnovers per game, which is only 18th most in the league. So they haven't been great at that. You know, like Minnesota, for example, is the only team that gives up more opposing offensive rebounds than the Kings. And part of that reason is because they average the most turnovers per game, opposing turnovers per game. My apologies. So, you know, they're willing to be a little bit more risky for the sake of optimizing their transition strength, their strength of transition offense, compared to really emphasizing, you know, we need to be better at rebounding. Like, obviously that is a focus. That's something that the Kings need to make sure that all 5 guys on the floor are paying attention to that. But at the same time, you know, running in transition is going to be the best team that this team can do. That seems to be the identity. We keep hearing the idea of finding consistency from Alvin Gentry, and it seems like that's where he believes that can be found. And part of the way, again, as I was saying, would be to increase opponent turnovers. And I was surprised that those numbers had been down all year when we'd been hearing pace over and over. But for the first time, from what I had seen, we heard mentioned that the team wants to force more turnovers. And when I first got onto this was from De'Aaron Fox post game when they played the Clippers in LA, the first of these 2 games in a row against the Clippers. This was on December 1st. And Fox mentioned the idea of forcing more turnovers. And at the end of, before that post-game press conference wrapped up, I asked him about forcing turnovers and if that was something they were looking to do a little bit more often. And I'll play that clip here now. By the way, this is now going up on YouTube as well for the first time, and you'll be able to see the, I guess I made somewhat of a little graphic for overlay for the episode and for whatever quotes that you're going to hear throughout this. I have about 5 different quotes that you're going to hear, and you would be able to see them on YouTube as well with a little bit of, what I think is the most notable thing said in there as well, kind of over it. So definitely check out Kings Pulse on YouTube as well. But like I was saying, the idea of forcing turnovers, I heard for the first time this season from Fox. And when I asked him if that is something they're looking to emphasize since Gentry has taken over, or if it was beginning of the year, this after they played the Clippers for the first time on December 1st, this was Fox's response. Hey, Darren, you just mentioned trying to force turnovers there for the sake of pace. Is that something that you guys have focused on from the start of the year, or is that more of a new thing here as the year's gone along?
I think it's something that we definitely wanted to get started from the start of the season. Being able to get into the ball, turn a guy a couple of times. It's not about, getting the steal on the ball. I mean, that's for NBA players, that's a tough thing to do, but just trying to get them to turn their back, make passes more difficult. You don't want to deny every pass, but just try to get people to run their offense a little bit further out if you can do that. I mean, it's just being disruptive. You want to get steals, you want to get deflections, but, sometimes you're not going to do that. And you just want to be disruptive, get teams out of their flow just so they're not comfortable. And tonight we did a great job. We've had a few games that we've done a great job at it, a few games that we've done a poor job at it. So just try to continue to do that. Like I said, sometimes your deflections will be down, but you can still be disruptive without getting deflections and steals.
And I think we saw that in the first game against the Clippers and then also the second one as well. Defense is the idea of where you can find consistency, right? Because the whole offense wins games, defense wins championships. I think the idea is like, if you're a great offensive team, sometimes shots aren't going to fall. That's something that we'll get into a little bit later with shots not falling for this team, but sometimes it's not going to happen. We heard a lot of, I think I spoke about it in the last episode with Chris and Frankie of, we got good looks, but shots weren't falling tonight. And sometimes that's going to happen, but you can play consistent, hard-nosed defense that, like De'Aaron Fox said, is disrupting your opponents and just causing them to think a little bit more. Like he said, taking longer to get into their offensive possessions. He mentioned getting them to start or initiate the plays from a little bit further out. So that way there's more opportunity to jump passing lanes. That's another thing that I don't remember who we hear it from. I believe it was Haliburton that I'll play the clip here in a moment. We hear that same thing as well. The idea of jumping passing lanes seems to be interesting, which, Haliburton is a guy that should be good at that. I think with his length and instincts, De'Aaron Fox is obviously extremely fast. I think he should be really good at jumping passing lanes. So yes, I think the team has this idea that they can find consistency on the defensive end. The issue is that they've been consistently bad last season. This year, they've been inconsistent, that they've had their good moments. Before this second Clippers game, they're sitting at 26th in defensive rating, according to Basketball Reference. Not great. I don't think that they're going to be a great defensive team, but I think this idea of being disruptive and aggressive on the defensive end was seen against the Clippers on the second night and also the first one as well. But to continue on that point, I asked Alvin Gentry at practice after hearing that from Fox. I asked Gentry at practice the day after how much they were really emphasizing pace. And here is that conversation. We heard De'Aaron talk about forcing turnovers, and the team hasn't done that at a great rate this year. Is that something that you're looking to do a little bit more often, possibly?
We talked about that today, about how, we have to be in a position where we're forcing turnovers and creating easy baskets for us, So, active hands and getting into the ball a little bit better than we have. But we need to do that. That helps your offense, obviously, when you're coming up with live ball turnovers and being able to run out with numbers. So that's one of the things that we emphasize.
Sorry for that audio quality. Obviously, at practice, there's a lot going on in the background there. But yeah, I mean, Gentry just confirms that that's something that they are emphasizing. Like he said, they're not changing all too much since the switch from Walton to him, but that is one thing that he has been emphasizing for sure. And then also got a chance to ask Haliburton a few questions on the idea of forcing turnovers after Gentry as well. So here's that clip.
These last two games, does it kind of feel like a representation of your season, just the ups and downs that you guys have experienced already?
Yeah, I would say that. I would say it's been a roller coaster of a year so far. When we're good, and when we're bad, we're bad. So, but we're just trying to, we preached it from the end of last season. It's just finding that consistency, and we're still figuring that out. But as long as we just stay with it, and clean up the right things, it'll all come together.
Is there an aspect of the game where you think you guys can find that consistency right now you have identified?
I think the easiest thing, right? Things that we can control. I think we can control, like what Alvin keeps talking about, right? Like our pace, like no matter what, like if we're missing shots, if we're not getting stopped, like we can control our pace. You know what I'm saying? We can control how hard we're getting the ball over the court. Making teams play fast, which we did a really good job of in LA the other day. So, things like that is got to be our identity, and then you kind of just go on from there.
Yeah, and on that, we've heard a couple guys talk about forcing turnovers more often. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, are you talking about me personally or as a team?
Yeah, as a team, both.
Yeah, I think just being in the passing lanes, getting into the ball more. I think we got good length and guys with good instincts. That we got guys like Davion that can get into the ball and force guys to run their offense out farther. It makes it easier to be in passing lanes, get out and run. And you saw in LA, once we're in the passing lanes, getting stops, run out dunks and fast break points, then we're really hard to stop because now we're completely dictating pace. And a lot of teams don't want to play at the same pace as we want to.
Is that level of aggression kind of more, like risk reward sort of thing?
It can be at times for sure. You gamble and. If you give up, you're going to give up shots, or you try to leak out on a long shot, and now you're giving up offensive rebounds. So you just got to figure out the smartest way to go about those things.
Yeah, I think that he mentions that they did that well in LA. That was Haliburton, and then they did it well coming back to Sacramento against that same LA Clippers team. The Clippers were probably tired. Again, second night of a back-to-back for them after just beating the Lakers in a pretty close one the night before. But no matter, there's a size advantage that the Clippers were working with in this one. And I thought that the defensive physicality that we saw from the Kings was a little bit different. They felt more, into the ball handlers and jumping passing lanes, just making guys uncomfortable, not allowing the opposing team to just casually go through their sets, making it difficult just for a guy to get around a screen on the weak side. And little things like this, just being pesky, annoying, disruptive, I guess was the word De'Aaron used. So I'll stick with that one on the defensive end. I think they did a really good job of that in the first half against the Clippers at Golden One Center. And like you heard mentioned, they also did a pretty good job when they played the Clippers in LA the game prior. But yes, this is the idea of where they can find consistency is in pace and with speed in pace. And the best way to make that happen is by getting stops on the defensive end. So last clip from practice that I want to throw in here as well, a little bit more focus on consistency in general rather than specifically forcing turnovers, but just to continue on this idea of where the Kings can find consistency. And I think we saw promising signs of this in these Clippers games. This one is from Richaun Holmes at practice.
This is what we can be if we consistent. We know what we can do and we know what we can bring. We just have to do it consistently. Like I said, we've been talk about it all the time. Now we got a chance to get some practice time, get some reps, and then get out there on the court and do something about it. So it's exciting.
There's been such an emphasis on rebounding and getting you help down there. Do you kind of see some of those things coming along for you guys?
We down there. We're an undersized team. We're down there battling, and we got to figure out a way to get it done on the glass. And I know the guards are coming in, helping me pinch, rebound, things of that sort, coming in, grabbing them over the top when I'm boxing out, and that's something we're definitely going to do.
You talked about being consistent. Where do you think you guys can find that consistency?
Mainly on the defensive end, I feel like. Sometimes I feel like when our shots aren't going, we can kind of let that dictate our defense. But when we locked in on defense, we've shown what we can do in stretches, and we just have to do it consistently.
Yeah, so keeping up the defense is obviously a point of emphasis. And, we saw defense be a really big problem last year, obviously. 30th defensive rating. And the idea with a lot of the offseason acquisitions was a focus on defense, that the team would be able to get better in that aspect. They haven't really, sadly. I take that back, actually. I shouldn't say that. They have. They definitely have, from the low bar that they're starting at. I think they still have struggled on the defensive end for stretches. And like Holmes said, I think when their offense is really going through slumps, you can see it affect their energy level on the defensive end. And Tyrese mentioned something along the lines of the idea of getting a stop on defense, weirdly, the offense will inspire him or get him excited to play defense because he knows that it'll lead to a transition opportunity. So that's a little bit more exciting and just, a little bit more motivation to lock in on defense. Not saying that guys need more motivation, but I think this is just a thing in the NBA that nobody's locked in for 48 minutes. As much as you want that to happen, maybe not nobody, but 45, you're going to have your little lapses. And I think that being more encouraged to play defense, because it means that you're going to get more exciting transition opportunities that are easier for you and the guys around you on the other end. If that's going to encourage guys a little bit, then great. But I think the main aspect is just trying to maximize what they think their identity is with this speed, meaning a very high-paced offense. So that's kind of what we've been seeing. And yeah, I think that it's gone all right. I was really encouraged by the defense that we saw in the second game against the Clippers, and the first one as well. We saw some small lineups against the Clippers with Paul George or Marcus Morris, whichever one you want to say, playing the 5. And then we also saw big lineups in the game prior with Serge Ibaka at the 4 and Ivica Zubac at the 5. And the Kings played well against both. Maybe they struggled a little bit against the bigger lineup, but I think that the Kings were able to react to both of those lineups. And the Clippers aren't some amazing team. It is a little concerning to me that we're going to go through some of the other aspects aside from the just defensive intensity and effort that we saw from the Kings that I thought they did well. Again, encouraging signs of growth. And they still kind of only barely scraped by the Clippers. But, a win is a win. I felt like they were in control of this game for most of it, if not all of it, really. And another aspect that's been interesting is we've heard Tyrese Haliburton be criticized a lot for his lack of aggression on the offensive end. And I am admittedly one of those people. I don't understand why. Maybe not. I don't understand. I don't think Tyrese Haliburton should barely be taking one more shot per game than Davion Mitchell. I certainly don't think that there should be. Tyrese Haliburton is shooting 4.4 threes per game. And this is including both of the games against the Clippers, 4.8 threes per game. Lewis King is shooting 4.7, only in 3 games, but Terrence Davis is shooting 4.8. Again, Haliburton 4.4. I may have said that number incorrectly earlier, but Haliburton 4.4. Chimezie Metu 4.3 per game. De'Aaron Fox 4.3. Davion Mitchell 4.0. Just 4 attempts per game. There's no reason that all of Terrence Davis, Chimezie Metu, De'Aaron Fox, Davion Mitchell, Tyrese Haliburton, and Harrison Barnes should be within half of 3-point attempt of each other. Harrison Barnes and Tyrese Haliburton are damn near 40% 3-point shooters. Those guys need to be getting shots up from beyond the arc at a really high rate. And that hasn't been happening. Harrison Barnes has been out, and we'll get to the injury update with him and Mo Harkless at the end of this episode. But there's been some, I think, fair criticism about Haliburton looking for his own shot. And another thing that we saw on top of the increased defensive aggressiveness and physicality against these Clippers in the second game is that we saw Haliburton be more aggressive, specifically in the first half of this game against the Clippers. He came out, man, and was very confident. You know, I think every time that people go under screens, Haliburton should be pulling it. There's part of me that wonders if his low release is impacted by on those impacts those type of shots more than some other guys, because you're shooting over your own player there as you're kind of behind the guy that's screening for you. And I almost wonder if, his form takes a little bit longer than some other guys. So it makes it a little bit more difficult to kind of quickly get that shot off and specifically get it off over one of your taller own players. But either way, like, he needs to be comfortable hitting that shot. There's no reason defenders should be able to go under on him. And most of the time it doesn't happen, but it's still like, I think that he should be taking that every single time that it does. And again, like I said, in this first half of this Clippers game, he played great. For reference, his season averages this year prior to the second Clippers game at Sacramento was Tyrese's season averages were 11.5 points on 10.5 field goal attempts per game and 4.2 3-point attempts per game. And just in the first half against the Clippers, Tyrese was at 15 points on 6 of 9 from the field and 3 of 5 from deep. So just under 1.5 field goal attempts from his season average, and already passed his season average in 3-point attempts just at halftime. And he did somehow only end with 18 points in this one. So he only managed 3 more points in the second half, which is, obviously not great, but he only shot the ball 5 more times in that second half. He made 1 of 5, which was a shot from 3, where he went 1 of 3 in that second half. He also had a few weird offensive fouls called on him that were like push-offs, I guess, while he was functioning in the pick and roll and kind of trying to keep his defender in jail on his back. And yeah, got some weird push-offs, and it was pretty funny when he got that call playing defense that somebody pushed off of him. I'm sure that was probably a pretty good feeling after feeling like he maybe got a little bit of a quick whistle on the other end. So seeing him be aggressive in that first half, like, this is kind of what I'm going to keep coming back to. That first half against the Clippers, the second Clippers game in Sacramento, was just kind of what felt like checking all these boxes of things that I had been concerned about and felt like there had been needs for growth. A physical defense, like I mentioned, Haliburton being aggressive on the offensive end. Fox was really aggressive on the offensive end in that first half as well. We saw, some patented, whatever you want to call it, coast to coast takes from De'Aaron Fox that I feel like have been a rare sight this year, which I don't quite understand why. I get his half-court struggles to an extent. The shooting around him has been poor, like we talked about with Chris and Frankie on the last episode. I'll get into a little bit here in a moment as well. But transition offense, like, this is where Fox should thrive. And if we see that a little bit more often, maybe we're going to see more of these. But him being aggressive on the offensive end was encouraging as well. I mentioned his defense on Paul George, and Tyrese Haliburton credited him for kind of bringing the energy and leadership on that end in the postgame, which was great to see. Part of the reason that Haliburton needs to shoot more and Barnes needs to shoot more, because those other guys that they're rubbing shoulders with, Barnes when he returns, those other guys that they're rubbing shoulders with when it comes to the amount of attempts from beyond the arc each game, are shooting really bad. And these numbers are prior to the most recent Clippers game, but on wide open 3-point attempts, the Kings were converting at a historically bad rate. NBA.com only started tracking what they consider wide open, or like wide open. I think they do tight and then very tight based on how far the closest defender is when this shot is attempted. They only started tracking this in 2013-14. But in that time, the Kings are shooting 30.4% on wide open threes, which is the worst rate since that stat has started. Since that stat has been tracked, there we go, on NBA.com in 2013-14. Again, 30.4%, which is just horrible. And what you're seeing that from, on wide open threes, Terrence Davis, 8.7%, 2 out of 23. Chimezie Metu, 22.2%, 8 out of 36. Maurice Harkless, 21.7%, 6 out of 35. Davion Mitchell, 27.6%, 16 out of 58. Now, these guys are going to shoot better. I think all of these guys are better shooters than what we've seen, especially on those wide open shots. There is an aspect of them simply missing shots. So I understand when we hear that a little bit in post game, it's just kind of tiring when there are clearly other issues going on as well. But that has been a factor. And Buddy Hield's percentage has slipped a little bit. I believe he was about 37% because, like Chris, Frankie, and I talked about in the latest in the episode prior to this, he was, I believe he only made 4 threes in his last 3 games, not counting this one against the Clippers, where he did again only make 1 of 5. Wow, Buddy Hield is on a very cold stretch right now. But luckily, we know that Buddy Hield is going to come back around. You know, Buddy Hield is one of the best three-point shooters in the league. Even if you're frustrated with other things that Buddy Hield maybe struggles to do on the offensive end, I thought he's driven to the hole and to the basket and finished there more often. And I've been happy with that this season. But even if you're frustrated with whatever other aspects of his game, even maybe what I just mentioned, his three-point shooting is obviously what Buddy Hield does, you know, upwards of 10 attempts per game. And he's going to be right around 40% by the end of the year. I've been frustrated with Buddy, but he's going to do that, and this team needs that. The thing is that, again, these other guys kind of have to get these shots up, but they haven't been converting at a great rate, and that's an issue. Terrence Davis is specifically the one where it's like, this has got to come back around, right? And sure enough, in these last 2 games against the Clippers, that's exactly what happened. In the first game in LA, Terrence Davis starts in the absence of Harrison Barnes and Maurice Harkless and Marvin Bagley in that one as well. Terrence Davis, in 30 minutes, put up 23 points on 9 of 14 from the field, 5 of 9 from 3, and 3 steals in that one as well. He was a really big factor. You know, him being able to space the floor is what you expect him to do. He's had a horrific start shooting the ball this season, which you'll hear him talk about in a minute here. But these 2 Clippers games could be what he needs to get back in a rhythm, because prior to his struggles this season, if you go back to last year, he shot 36.7% on 4.4 3-point attempts per game. This year so far, not including the second Clippers game, he was at 25.8% on 4.4 attempts per game. Yeah, and what was this number when it came to wide open? 8.7%. What the 2 out of 20? That is ridiculous. Terrence Davis is a good shooter. Even if he's not a great shooter, he's a more than capable shooter. And it was only a matter of time until we saw that. So, like I mentioned, he did manage 23 points in 30 minutes on 5 of 9 from 3 in that first Clippers game. And then in the most recent one, he had 28 points in 29 minutes, including 9 of 16 from the field, 6 of 11 from 3, and 4 of 4 from the free throw line. And most importantly, the Kings only scored 14 points in the final 7 minutes and 23 seconds that they played against the Clippers. They hit a stretch where they really struggled to score. A lot of that had to do with the Clippers playing a zone defense, and the Kings were struggling to shoot their way out of it. They weren't getting to the middle of the zone. The zone was really frustrating them in this one and causing them some issues, and the Clippers were switching a lot. So it kind of blew up a lot of Sacramento's half-court offense that already struggles in the first place. But Sacramento, again, only scored 14 points in the final 7 minutes and 23 seconds of that game. Terrence Davis had 10 of them, and the rest came from free throws. And they all came towards the end of the game. There was only between the 7 minute and 23 seconds mark to the 2 minute and 28 second mark, Terrence Davis was the only Kings player to score. Buddy Hield wasn't in the game because Terrence Davis was legitimately on fire earlier. And I love that Gentry was willing to go back to the hot hand, and it paid off. You can hear what Terrence Davis had to say about his shooting struggles prior to this point earlier in the year. And, you know, I think that shooting is a mental thing when it comes for a lot of these guys, and you can get pretty low on yourself or feel really good. And that is going to affect the outcome of a lot of your shots. And here's Terrence Davis after his big game against the Clippers at Golden One Center on his struggles from earlier in the year.
Terrence, just how good does it feel for you to have this stretch here where you seem to have found your stroke and sort of your niche with this team for right now?
Oh man, honestly, it's been tough. As a shooter, I tell this to Buddy, we talk all the time. But as a shooter, when you're not hitting shots, it's very, very frustrating. Just because that's kind of what they pay you for. To make and hit shots. So when it's not going in, and it's just really, really frustrating. You start to question yourself and things. Lately I've been feeling really good. My teammates have it's been encouraged me to keep shooting coaches. So everything has been great.
TD, how much of a relief was that previous game on Wednesday, and how much did you kind of feel like you carried some of that momentum into that?
Oh well, to make up for the Memphis game, to come out and kind of have that intensity at LA was kind of like the edge we needed and wanted to start the game with. And I think since then we just kind of been focused on ourselves, just really trying to just I would just say really work to get to where we know we can get to as a team. Man, this is a very talented group. We just got to put it together.
Missing some guys on the wings tonight, but what did that four-guard lineup do for you guys in the fourth quarter in terms of just playmaking and being able to get open shots?
Oh man, I would just say defensively, like that lineup is just you got a lot of scrappy guys in the game, so attention to detail is major. I think that says a lot about coach and the trust he has in that lineup and those guys that's on the floor. So it was pretty good to kind of go back to it.
Can you talk more about the defensive effort tonight? You guys held them under 100 or under 40%. I mean, what were you guys doing out there to really shut them down?
But just really taking a challenge. One to guard, one to make a stop, limit them one shot. No offense rebounds and things of that sort. But it's just I would say just really a 1-2 man. One to guard, and that kind of changed the dynamic of our team. Because we're able to get stops and run. That's how I would say that's the best advantage we have is our speed. My coach says it all the time. So it kind of when we locking up and playing great defense, let me one rebound and getting out of run. That's the way we want to play.
Terrence, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about Marvin and he's been through lots of ups and downs here, and to have another opportunity at this point and to seemingly be taking advantage of that. What are you seeing and hearing from him? What do you like about what he's doing for this team right now?
He's just been staying down, and Brian, honestly, just really, I know it's a tough situation for him. Being number 2 pick, and it's a tough situation. A lot of guys in his position haven't been through something like that. So for him to just to put that to the side and keep working, keep grinding, come in here, double tonight, missing out the last game, illness. That just shows a lot about him, honestly. And he really changed the game for us, rebounding, just being a dog on the defensive and offensive board. So, kudos to Marvin, man.
TD, we're going to go to Zoom. Christos, go ahead.
Hey, Terrence.
How you doing?
Do you hear me now?
Go ahead, Christos.
Great game, first of all. How needed was that win for you guys, mentally wise?
Honestly, it was everything. Honestly, that's a good team. They'll definitely be in the playoffs. So that win just I would just say we can take it and keep going, keep stacking. Honestly, we got Orlando coming here, very winnable game. Just taking care of business. That's honestly what we're trying to accomplish.
All right. Thank you, TD.
Thank you.
So yeah, I think that you can tell from the way that TD kind of talks about it, that the shooting struggles that he had at the beginning of the year were really affecting him. And I think understandably so, like he says, that's what he was paid to do, is kind of what he's hinting at there. I guess not hinting, he says pretty directly. And then starting 12 of 57 from three, only 21% is just got to be a rough feeling. You know, there was a lot of talk that he played really well at training camp. We expected him to have a role going into this season, and that hasn't happened. So if Harrison Barnes can return and Buddy Hield can get back to his elite three-point shooting, Tyrese Haliburton can become a high volume and remain elite three-point shooter, and Terrence Davis can emerge as a player who is hitting shots at a good rate from beyond the arc, then the Kings' spacing issues don't look horrible anymore. You know, still playing Chimezie Metu, Marvin Bagley, Maurice Harkless maybe isn't ideal, but I think those guys' minutes can go down. You know, we even saw a 4-guard lineup for a little while in this Clippers game. It's not the first time we've seen it. I think it's a little bit out of necessity because, again, there's no Harrison Barnes or Maurice Harkless currently. But either way, Terrence Davis, I think, has an opportunity to be pretty impactful on this team as long as he's hitting shots, and he needs to be a spark plug off the bench offensively at very least. And then I think he also forces some steals and gets out in passing lanes, similarly to what we've heard be an emphasis for a lot of these guys and the entire roster, really. So I think Terrence Davis fits, at least from a skill set standpoint. Positionally might be a little overlapping with some of the other talents that Sacramento has, but obviously him shooting and becoming a above average three-point shooter like he's expected to be. And again, Terrence Davis is only in his 3rd year in the NBA. He's not exactly the youngest guy, but when it comes to NBA experience, he still has plenty of room to grow. And for that reason, I think that there's still more to expect of Terrence Davis. There's no reason to be so skeptical of what we've seen to begin the year that you're just like, you know, I don't know that we can ever rely on Terrence Davis. And I think we don't know if we can, but we also don't know that we can't. So what we've seen in these 2 games of upwards of 20 points for Terrence Davis, he's even closing in the second Clippers game, is extremely encouraging. Buddy Hield's got to turn it around. I think that he will. He looked really poor in the second Clippers game. The first one, he didn't play great either. Buddy Hield has really struggled. And again, he'll come back around when it comes to shooting the ball, but Buddy looks very weirdly off, like almost in a way that we haven't seen much recently. But the Kings get a win. And it's crazy with how poor it feels like this season has gone because of the inconsistencies. And I think it's more of the way that they're losing games rather than how many games they're losing. Obviously, their win-loss of 10-14 isn't ideal. But I think looking at the way that the schedule started, like 10-14 was probably going to be somewhere near an average prediction if you had to sit someone down prior to the season, myself or whoever listening prior to the season, and ask, what record do you think the Kings have after 24 games, 25 games? 11-14. Say if we were doing 24 games, 10-14, like it's really not going to be far off from what most people guessed. And that 10-14 record has them at the 11th seed in the Western Conference, with the Portland Trail Blazers at 10th, who, man, Portland looks like something. Neil O'Shea just got fired. They just lost the night that I'm recording this, again, the night that the Kings beat the Clippers at Golden One Center. Portland lost to Boston by nearly 30 points, 28 points. They gave up 145 points in regulation. Holy crap. The Kings are only a game out of that 10 spot. What's even crazier, the Kings are only 2 games behind the 5th seed in the Western Conference. And that is a 4-way tie for that 5th seed with the LA Clippers, the Los Angeles Lakers, the Dallas Mavericks, and the Denver Nuggets. And then after Denver sitting at 8, you see the 9 Minnesota Timberwolves, who the Kings are a game and a half behind. 10, the Portland Trail Blazers, who the Kings are a game behind. And then the Sacramento Kings, half a game behind the Kings. You have the San Antonio Spurs. And then you have a drop to 3.5 games behind the Kings, New Orleans Pelicans. And then you're also seeing the Houston Rockets and Oklahoma City Thunder. Those three teams, Pelicans, Rockets, Thunder, at this point, not saying as, I mean, I guess the Rockets have won 5 in a row. I shouldn't be counting anybody out or anything like that. It's still very early in the year, but the Kings are still in a spot where they absolutely are serious contenders for the play-in, for the playoff. Like, this season, they should still be expected to make the play-in. Nothing should change from that. And we saw Gentry get a little bit of an opportunity to have a practice and maybe start to emphasize some of the things that he wants to, like a aggressive defense where they're forcing turnovers and more physical and disruptive on the defensive end, a more aggressive Tyrese Haliburton, more pace nonstop. And if you're not running, then we're going to find somebody that is. And his willingness to finagle with lineups more so than what we saw with Walton. Like, I think Walton was playing with lineups a lot, but I think that on a game-to-game basis, for example, in this Clippers one, we saw that Alex Len was the backup center option, and that wasn't working amazingly. They ended up going to Tristan Thompson, and Thompson had a really, really good stretch at the end of the third and beginning of the fourth where his defense was really crucial against this small Clippers lineup that they were rolling out there. So I think just a willingness to kind of adjust on the fly a little bit more is what it feels like we've seen with Gentry. And getting comfortable with what he has in front of him as the main shot caller. I think this time that he had between these two Clippers game is very important. And then also the Kings have a hole in their schedule coming up. Maybe that's a weird way to say it. They have a little bit of a break, I guess. They just played, again, when I'm recording this today, on Saturday at Golden One Center against the Clippers. Now they have 1, 2, 3 days off until they play on Wednesday the 8th at 7 p.m. against the Orlando Magic. I'm going to cry watching Franz Wagner. The team's 5-19. That should be a win for the Sacramento Kings, but should be a win or should be a loss. Probably shouldn't be in my vocabulary at this point. Maybe not at this point, just any time covering the Sacramento Kings. But point being, they have 3 days. They're going to have a practice during that stretch. And I think that that's going to be something that is important for Gentry. It gives him another opportunity to kind of, again, emphasize the things that he wants to and how he wants this Sacramento Kings team to play. And if we can get more of what we saw in the first half against the Clippers with an aggressive defense where they are forcing turnovers and disrupting opponents, an aggressive Tyrese Haliburton pushing the pace every damn possession, De'Aaron Fox getting more of his, coast-to-coast opportunities that are just so Fox. I don't know how else to say it. Richaun Holmes running in transition. I think if we can get Buddy Hield back to shooting at a good rate, Terrence Davis continues to be playable on the offensive end when he's out there and be a spark plug. Maybe the inconsistencies don't have such a low when he is on the downswing when it comes to the inconsistencies that we see from him, where it's less of a wide variance, and he still has the highs and lows, but the lows aren't, 8.9%, less than 10% on wide open threes. Like, those guys are going to start hitting shots a little bit more. And while I talked about Gentry's willingness to mess with lineups, some of it has been out of necessity because he's dealt with a lot of injuries. We've seen a couple things to Haliburton here and there, but most recently we saw Marvin Bagley, who did end up playing tonight against the Clippers, and he played well. I think a lot of people were. I'll say that I'm not as excited as a lot of people seem to be. It was his first double-double of the season. It was a solid performance from Bagley. I really liked it on the offensive end. He's just playing a role. I mean, he kind of just sits in the corner. Sometimes he's the roll man in a pick and roll, which is great. I mean, he didn't do that often enough. A lot of it's not a two-man game. It's kind of like this drag and two bigs, and they'll have one roll and then the other stay there and usually set a screen for Buddy or TD. And if they're not paying attention to Marvin, there's a little lob pass that Ty or De'Aaron can hit at a pretty good rate. So I like that he's he being Bagley is fitting a very simplistic offensive role. I think that's really important for his development because, a lot of times he was getting thrown out there and he was still trying to be the future star, Marvin Bagley. And it's like, no, right now you need to just find where you fit on the basketball floor. And I think he's figured that out a little bit more. I haven't loved him on the defensive end. I still didn't think he was great tonight or anything like that. I thought that he wasn't bad, which I guess is progress. So, yeah, I'm certainly not complaining about Bagley, but I'm just not celebrating his game in the way that I felt like some people may have been. But point being, where I started with all that is he was out recently with a non-COVID related illness. It wasn't sure if he was going to be available for the second game against the Clippers. He obviously did end up playing. The other two injuries that we've seen are Harrison Barnes has a right foot sprain. He's hopeful for the game against the Magic on Wednesday. And again, we have 4 days until that game. So getting these guys extended rest was a little bit of a reasoning we heard from Gentry on, maybe him or Mo could have played in this Clippers game, but it was more of a, like, we're going to play it safe because why would we risk it when we do have 3 days of rest coming up after this to just really play it safe, especially with Harrison, of a guy that is so important to this team, constantly a leader in minutes played per game. He's got a right foot sprain. We saw him dressed at practice. So Gentry said that he is hopeful that he will play. And he also said that he's hopeful Maurice Harkless will be available against Orlando. And Harkless currently is dealing with knee soreness in his left knee. So getting those guys back, being able to get a little bit of rest for this team that is really kind of traveled a lot and I think had a lot of games in short stretches. I think that, again, it was a very tough beginning of the schedule for the Sacramento Kings, and now they're going through a stretch where it's a little bit more in their favor. We see versus Orlando, and then they go on a road trip where they're facing Charlotte, Cleveland, and Toronto. 3 winnable games. Also 3 teams that may be about equal with Sacramento. But certainly nothing where I'm looking and I'm like, oh, the Kings probably are going to lose this game. And then they come home, they play Washington, Memphis, San Antonio. So these next 7 games that the Kings are looking at are all against very winnable opponents. Memphis is playing well, Washington is playing well. You could say that about a decent amount of these teams, but nothing, again, where I'm like, man, this team is so much better than the Kings. So we'll see. I think getting a good bit of rest for these guys, Gentry getting another opportunity to kind of put his fingerprints a little bit more on this roster and what he wants to emphasize, which seems to be, again, aggressive defense in forcing turnovers and causing disruptions, maybe jumping in passing lanes a little bit more and giving you more opportunities to do that by being more aggressive in defending the ball handler. And then also ridiculous pace, which some of that is going to have to do with getting stops on the defensive end or turnovers, like I said, but then also securing defensive rebounds, which team hasn't been great at. I don't know that they're ever going to be great at it. But I like that they are dictating. They're worried about what they can control. That's one other thing I guess I want to get in here before I wrap up this episode is we've heard a lot about, being in control of the game. And I felt like that's another difference I've noticed is that with Walton, it was a lot of taking away what the other team was doing rather than optimizing what the Kings were doing themselves. And it feels like the opposite with Gentry so far. Again, chance I'm reading this wrong. It's my first year actually in the press rooms. So still kind of getting my feet wet and used to it, but that's just what I've seen in the differences between these two guys so far in this season. And again, the Kings are really in a fine spot. If they can get healthy and some of these things start to click a little bit more where they become a not horrific defensive team, get out in transition as often as possible, become damn close to the fastest team in the league, and get some more aggression from guys like Tyrese Haliburton and Harrison Barnes, then, like I said, 2 games out of the 5th seed in the Western Conference, which is pretty crazy to think. And they only have 7. The next 7 games are all winnable situations. So Kings are in a good spot. I feel encouraged after what we saw from that Clippers game. I get the people that are going to say, yeah, I'm talking about they played great in the first half. And LA kind of came back in the second half, but the Kings held up just fine. There were moments where it got to like a concerning point, the deficit being kind of trimmed down by the Clippers, but the Kings maintained control. And I think that even just what we saw for that first half was just so encouraging to me that I'm hoping we can get more of that moving forward. It was a lot of what we had heard talked about kind of seeing actualized on the court, which a lot of times we were hearing the same things and it was never actually happening. So I'm optimistic moving forward for this Kings team. I'm going to keep pumping out content for Kings Pulse. Again, I'm actually now putting these on YouTube as well. See my face. You can see some of these clips that I'm including as well. And with me being at more practices, shoot arounds, and part of all these press conferences, I'm going to be including these clips more often. Sorry that sometimes the audio is for some of these post-game pre-games. I'm on Zoom sometimes. For example, the one with Terrence Davis today had some technical issues on the Kings side that made that audio come out a little, how do I want to say, cloudy, I guess. So yeah, sometimes those audio aren't going to be great, but if you watch on YouTube, you can see the video of those guys talking as well. Sometimes I'll put a little graphic over it as well as I kind of try to play with that a little bit more. Obviously available on all major podcast platforms. Subscribe, rate, and review if you enjoy the pod. I can't tell you how much that does. And obviously you'll get any of the new episodes put in your feed right when they get uploaded. And of course, take a look at the Kings Herald. I'm going to have articles there, and obviously all the other great guys that I have on this show all the time. And I'm sure all of you guys are aware of are putting out good content there all the time. So take a look at the Kings Herald to support local independent Kings coverage, and give a look at the Patreon. And if you enjoyed this episode of the Kings Pulse podcast, you'll hear from us again in the next couple of days. I don't know if you realize I kind of changed my schedule to post games usually, unless there's a back-to-back. But with this little stretch coming up, like I said, 3 days off, you'll probably get something around Tuesday, but no promises. We'll see. So like I said, if you enjoyed, please subscribe, rate, and review.